Welcome, everyone. I am very excited for today's webinar, our first conversation bringing together engineering and sustainability. Before we get into the details of our research and the wonderful work that my colleagues here have been doing, I want to level set and give you an idea of what Everest Group deems as our purpose framework. We basically see sustainability from a lens of two major areas that are being impacted. That's people and planet, or social issues and environmental issues. These can either be issues could be mitigated, or benefits to those two groups could be grown in our purpose framework. Around that is thinking about governance of these activities, and probably the most important thing is, what's the business case in doing that? What's the profit around it, or what is it that can grow this and enable it more? Our work in sustainability, and specifically technology and services, cuts across our entire practice of IT, BPS, and this group, engineering. So as an engineer, I am excited to get into a deep dive into what is sustainable engineering. And before I hand it over to the expert in the room, Nishant, I want to just whet your appetite with a couple of examples. When I think about engineering and sustainability, I think about my very first job, where I was doing health and safety activities on the shop floor. I also think about things like the UK, not just London, the UK has recently closed their very last coal power plant last month. And finally, I think about cities like Copenhagen in Denmark, where they've set a goal for a 2025 carbon neutrality. That's next year. They've already reached 75% of their 2005 emissions. They leveraged a lot of community in making those commitments and made a consensus around that. And finally, for the topic of today, they've enabled a bunch of engineering solutions around renewable sources of energy, enabling electronic mobility, and adopting carbon capture. So I'll say this: it's an exciting topic. There's a lot to discuss, and this is going to scratch the surface on that. So Nishant, as an expert in product engineering and manufacturing markets, how do you see this connection between sustainability and engineering?
Thank you. Thanks, Rita. And, I'm equally excited to talk about sustainability in engineering. And hello, everyone. By the way, Rita, great examples, the UK one, and especially the Copenhagen one that you brought up, right? When we think of engineering, we think about, these heavy engineering firms doing a lot of engineering core, hardware-centric work. But I think it's important to realize that, a lot of these cities and governments are also, very important stakeholders when it comes to sustainability, right? Now, coming back to your question, we essentially define sustainable engineering as, delivering environmentally responsible, socially beneficial product solutions, processes. You spoke about planet and people, right? That's essentially what we're talking about. But what's important to note here is, sustainable engineering essentially spans across the engineering value chain. Right? I won't go through the definition in detail, it's there on the slide and I'm sure everyone can read it. We have an intelligent group joining us today, but what I'd rather focus on is, the 4 tenets of sustainable engineering, right? And I'll take a few moments to do a double click on each of these, right? I think it's important for everyone to understand how vast and complex the space actually is, right? So sustainable product engineering, essentially we are talking about, engineering and R&D of products that are sustainable in nature, right? And there are multiple aspects that go into this, right? So there is R&D of new sustainable products. So as an example, think of electric vehicles, which are, really the prime example of how engineering and R&D can drive sustainable product development. And then there's a bunch of investments going into battery technology, into charging infrastructure, into alternate vehicle design, a whole bunch of activity happening in alternate fuels as well. And, that of course extends beyond automotive and goes into aviation as well. So that's, I think, one of the most important segments of product engineering. But then you've also got, how do you track a product sustainability metrics, right? And there you've got the whole materials angle, right? So are you using recycled material or sustainable sources to actually engineer your products? Right? So you've got firms like, IKEA and a lot of sports shoe brands today, which are actually using recycled material to design and engineer their products, right? Can you use fewer components in a product? So some of those elements of product design also go in here, right? I think we focus a lot on physical products, but there's an equally big element of software as well, right? So you've got a bunch of these software tools, platforms around simulation software, life cycle assessment tools, and those are equally relevant to this space. And then finally moving away from the environmental impact, you have ethical and inclusive UI UX, which I think is an important element of social equity and inclusivity to ensure that products are accessible for and by everyone, right? So that's just the first block, right? Just to give you a sense of how vast this space is. Then we've got process engineering, and this is essentially about how can you make your engineering processes itself more sustainable. Right? So you've got green software engineering practices, right? So how do you use code and write code in a manner so that your applications and platforms consume less energy? Right? A lot of organizations are investing in energy profiling and optimization. This is just to ensure that all their engineering and R&D processes consume less energy, right? So a lot of organizations investing in smart lighting, advanced energy management systems, HVAC controls, and so on and so forth, right? I think that's an interesting space to look at. And then you've got ethical AI. We are in the era of AI today, and I think we've done well to not mention AI for the first 10 minutes. But how do you develop AI solutions which can be used responsibly? How do you mitigate biases, ensure fairness, promote transparency? So I think there's a lot of talk of ethical AI today, but this is perhaps one segment that's still evolving. Right? Sustainable operations, supply chains, manufacturing, I think these are a little easier to comprehend. So on the operations bit, it's all about large scale automation of operations. So, today, as an example, you've got all these logistics and e-commerce firms that are investing in technologies like robotics and AI and automation. And that essentially helps them minimize wastage on the shop floor. It helps improve productivity, improves efficiency, and so on and so forth, right? Additionally, I think there are use cases like route optimization, sourcing of sustainable materials. So how do you ethically source your materials? I think that's becoming more and more important in today's world. And then finally, impact sourcing of the talent. So are you creating social and economic opportunities across the spectrum for everyone, right? Finally, sustainable manufacturing, which is ensuring sustainability on the shop floor and in your factory operations, right? And again, not getting into too many details here, but essentially we've got use cases around smart energy management, waste reduction, resource management, emissions tracking, monitoring, and so on, which are really taking off, right? I think the one interesting use case I'd probably highlight is on the employee health and safety aspect. So we've actually seen lots of large organizations, companies like Honeywell and GM that are actually investing in workforce geofencing and smart wearables to improve, safety, efficiency on the shop floor, right? So a very detailed answer to your question, Rita, but I think it was important to, give people a sense of what's happening. And the one last thing I'll say is, a lot of this is being enabled by digital, right? So it's not just sustainability and engineering coming together. We're actually seeing a convergence between sustainability, engineering, and digital as well. So I think that's a very interesting piece about this market.
Yeah, I love that convergence at the end. So excellent overview on these 4 categories, and love the sustainable engineering examples. In fact, we did have some questions that came in prior to starting our webinar. We got a question from Nigel Thomas from Tech Mahindra asking for real examples. I think he was a little skeptical, but after that presentation, hopefully not so much. So to everyone that's joined the conversation today, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. We're happy to answer them along the way or at the end. We do have an agenda set. We have time set aside for Q&A, but if it fits into the conversation, we're happy to address them. So on the agenda today, including a few polls, so you can't multitask the entire time. We do ask for some participation. We're going to talk about some of the important trends in the market, such as who are the executive sponsors, what should your sustainability priorities be, what are some of the talent trends. I'm so happy, Nishant, that you said impact sourcing. Next, we're going to talk about some of the key challenges that businesses are facing to meet their sustainability journey. Businesses, we talked about the public sector as well. What are those real challenges that we think these wonderful engineers can help with? And then finally, how can outsourcing or working in collaboration with service providers actually help you mitigate those challenges and solve these crises that are happening both on the social and environmental front? So here we go, getting into some more of the details. So one of the first things that we wanted to highlight is that there's a plethora of personas that are involved in thinking about sustainability. And this is not just true for engineering, it's true for the entire value chain. But it's important to think about this because I think at some point we thought, oh, they're hiring a chief sustainability officer, the responsibility is there, and that's that. But actually, when the CSO first came into the picture, they were mostly involved in a lot of the PR activities, the marketing activities, representing companies at the World Economic Forum, etc. What we've seen now, and as you can see from this slide, is that the CSO has definitely evolved. They are now in management. They have a presence on the business strategy front, and they're beginning to lead the integration of sustainability into business operations. And what we also see is that the chief technology officer, especially for the services that we cover, tends to be pretty much the number one stakeholder that we look at in terms of investments, in terms of where the budgets are, and in terms of who's driving the direction. And then we see all of these others. Now, I want to kind of go fast forward to the last two, being the chief procurement officer and the chief financial officer. While their percentage spend on this chart is low, they're sort of the key stakeholders from an enterprise perspective when we're thinking about how is it that sustainability engineering needs to be embedded into the services that are getting provided to an enterprise. So hopefully this is whetting your appetite. I don't see any questions yet, so that's great. We're being very crystal clear. But now we're going to ask you to put a pause on your email and give us an indication on this poll. How likely are you to invest in sustainable engineering for your organization in the next 12 to 18 months? And for all those service providers that are out there, let's say how many of you are planning to offer sustainability services to your clients. Nishant, I think you have a good sense of what we're going to see here, but what do you think are the major imperatives that are driving folks to talk about this?
I think multiple things, right? And it'll be interesting to see how the audience responds. But you've got factors like climate change and resource depletion, environmental degradation, regulatory pressure, which is, I think, one of the key aspects, right? There's a lot of pressure, actually, not just from regulators, but also from investors, right? So that's almost forcing the hand of enterprises to actually invest in sustainability. The only thing though is, we've been going through a bit of a tough macro over the past few months. So I think it'll be interesting to see, how enterprises are, looking at investing in sustainability and engineering, especially, over the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And certainly there's been a lot of uncertainty, especially with the number of elections that have been going on around the entire world. I think we can end this poll. We've got about half of you participating. I think it's very interesting to look at these results. I'm glad to see that most that are, maybe it's selection bias, most are either very likely or likely. For those that didn't answer the poll and either, answered unlikely or neutral, I do want to put a number in your head. In 2023, the market size for sustainability technology and services was $47 billion. And we estimate that that's going to grow by at least 15%. By 2026, it's going to be at least $72 billion. So for all you service providers that are out there, this is time to, rethink what your answer might be to this poll. And of course, sectorally, we know that energy and utilities is a big focus because of the climate challenges and commitments that have been made. But the other big ones are BFSI, retail. We talked about, the clothing and the sneakers, manufacturing, obviously, for this conversation. And one really interesting movement is in the public sector because of all of these governments making these huge commitments, but also places like the U.S. government offering huge investments in this space. So there we go. I think we can go ahead, Sushmita.
Nishant, if you could move to the next slide, please. Rita, and on the market as well, we are observing similar trends, and there is a visible increase in sustainability spend, and our poll result resonated the same. So in this slide, we can see the evolution of sustainability initiatives within enterprises. They're shifting from mere reporting and optimization towards creating value in three key stages, as you can see, which are the value protection, value creation, and acceleration. So what do we mean by value protection here? So think of it as activities that the organizations undertake to preserve or enhance their existing value while minimizing risks that are associated with the ESG factors. And under this segment, majority of the activities pertain to collection of ESG data and integrating them directly to the platform or a solution to understand the emission patterns. We have got life cycle assessments here, not just for the product or process, but for the entire social ecosystem to get the emission profile. And recently, there has been an increased usage of sustainable materials for packaging. Enterprises are using sustainable materials which are biodegradable, compostable, and recyclable to pack the products. Companies in the segment of consumer goods, electronics, food and beverages are investing in such sustainable materials to reduce emissions and also to reduce scope 3 emissions for the consumers. Organizations are also adopting technologies such as AI/ML to understand the emission patterns and are installing smart IoT monitoring solutions for remote monitoring of assets as well as operations based on real-time data. And all of these activities fall under regulatory compliance. However, as the enterprises mature, they move toward value creation to mitigate risks and also to create long-term financial viability. Here, the activities include enabling connected workforce on the shop floor to measure performance, predict failures, reduce waste, and most importantly, to drive productivity. Here, we're also seeing organizations investing in carbon capture and storage technologies to reduce their carbon footprint. And industrial companies like Dove Chemicals, ExxonMobil, given their high emissions, are investing in such carbon sequestration and carbon capturing solutions towards, so that they could help them in their net zero journey. And we're also seeing investments in integrated smart grid solutions to optimize energy consumption and reduce reliance on the fossil fuels. But from here, it is all about selling sustainability and accelerating value by developing or engineering sustainable products. And here, most of the activities involve developing sustainable products like a hydrogen-based powertrain, an electric vehicle, developing fuel cell architecture, or conceptualizing an entire hydrogen plant. And recently, we have seeing an increased investment in renewable infrastructure. Here, renewable infrastructure means physical assets and systems that are necessary to generate as well as distribute the renewable energy like solar energy and wind energy. And companies like Shell, BP have been investing heavily in this area. And there are also companies who are developing alternate sources of energy or low carbon energy solutions so that they could, accelerate the process of decarbonization. And we've also got, development of alternate materials such as composites or recyclable fibers, especially in the aerospace sector. As Nishant was talking, that segment is also witnessing, a lot of sustainability measures and these specific measures are to reduce the weight of the plane and also to improve its fuel efficiency. And looking at this evolution, you might wonder how the talent market is supporting this. Nishant, if you could move to the next slide. Yeah. So the talent landscape in the sustainable engineering space is evolving continuously, and new roles are being created to meet the new demands. And irrespective of where enterprises are on their maturity levels, they are scouting for talent. And within the sustainability and compliance, we see a lot of new roles here on the left-hand side. I'm just going to highlight few roles which have the highest demand in the market right now. So we have here energy efficient analyst whose role is to analyze energy consumption patterns and identify opportunities for improvement. We also have high demand for carbon management specialist whose job is to oversee carbon emission reduction strategies and also to look after the reporting process. When we are moving to the next segment, we see increasing demand for renewable energy integration specialist whose job is to integrate renewable energy sources into the existing energy systems, optimize the efficiency, and also to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Moving on to the sustainable products, here we have huge demand for environmental engineer whose job is to design and implement sustainable engineering solution, as well as demand for renewable, we have demand for the carbon management specialist as well. And I think I was just looking at the other one. In the sustainable products, we have high demand for the product lifecycle engineer, where the role is to analyze the environmental impact of the products through their life cycle from design and manufacturing to the end of life. And also we are witnessing a huge demand for circular economy experts. And clearly, hiring talent in this evolving landscape has become a huge challenge to enterprises. And speaking of challenges, could we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, this one works. So in this segment, we plan to cover in detail the challenges faced by enterprises in their sustainability journey, how they have been partnering with service providers to mitigate some of their challenges, and some of the best practices for enterprises to consider before they choose a service provider. Before that, we would like to understand the challenges faced by the audience here in your sustainability journey. Could we have the second poll, please?
Very,
Great.
very interesting, comments,
Go ahead, Nishant.
Sushmita. Yeah, so I was just saying that's fascinating, right? How enterprises are evolving in their maturity journey, the whole movement from value protection to creation, acceleration. I think that's an important one. But what's more important is, how are enterprises really doing this? I'm sure it's not as easy or simple as it sounds. Rita, you've worked a lot on sustainability beyond engineering as well, right? Which of these challenges really, stand out for you?
I think the stuff that we hear about is the data collection and reporting. And while that is complex, as well as the changing regulations, to me, the biggest challenge is to really demonstrate what the priorities are based on the based on like what your outcomes are going to be, sort of like the OKRs. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and especially when we talk about the regulations, it's what we have to remember is that the regulations are at the floor of what we want to do. The ceiling is really what the bigger opportunities are, and whether that's mitigating things or mitigating these challenges, these bad effects, or exacerbating the positive. Which I think, we did get a question earlier on about from Tarun Malik about from DXC Technologies on what kind of decarbonization solutions are available in the market. And I think that's where you start saying, oh, those are the opportunities, and that's where we can go with these things.
I think let's end the poll. Perhaps we've had a few people already submitting their results.
Yeah, so I think as we started off, regulation, data collection are two hard ones, but budgets is an interesting one. I think when we first started talking about sustainability about 3.5, 4 years ago, it wasn't even on the radar really, even though everyone knew that this is an expensive activity. But now budgets are really getting looked at, which is important, and I think goes back to some of the personas that we need to make sure are involved in these discussions. Nishant, I think you might have something interesting to say about the legacy systems and partnerships.
Yeah, I think, especially when it comes to engineering, nobody can really do it alone. The market is evolving so quickly, right? You've got all these older systems, manufacturing plants that are more than 50 years old and so on. How do you really integrate sustainability in those, right? I think that's something that keeps coming up as a problem statement in a lot of these scenarios, right? Partnerships, I think that's always important, right? And engineering itself is so complex, nobody can do it alone. You really need to engage with multiple ecosystem entities in order to implement some of this, right? I think that's especially when it comes to engineering, these two challenges keep cropping up across multiple domains.
Yes, I agree. So I think on that note, what we would like to tell the audience that's here, specifically those of you that are representing your businesses and are an enterprise looking to sustainable engineering as part of your solution, we'd like to make this special offer in going into detail on a couple of the companies that you're looking to work with or you're already working with, some comparative insights. The list on the right is just a representative list. You can tell us who it is you're working with, and we can let you know what we're seeing as their capabilities in sustainable engineering, who they are, what's the workforce look like, what's their partnership ecosystem look like, because even the firms themselves need a very robust partnership ecosystem. And what are some of the infrastructure investments that really need to be thought about so that you can formulate what those budgets need to be and make that, make that argument to your CFOs and your CEOs. So I think we have a link in the chat that you can click on to avail of that special offer just for today. And we'd love to have those conversations with you. So please do click on that and let us know what you're struggling with. On that note.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Rita, for for calling that out. I think I'd like to maybe go back to the poll that we discussed where we looked at the various challenges, right? By the way, we are actually currently running a peak matrix assessment in the sustainable engineering services space, and that's as we did the evaluation for service providers during the course of the assessment, we actually interacted with a lot of enterprises, customers, people who are buying some of these services off of their providers, right? One of the questions that we kind of asked them was, hey, what are some of your biggest challenges? What is it you're struggling with? Why are you outsourcing, right? Very interestingly, these are the 5 that came up the most often in some of those conversations. You'll notice the first 2 are also the ones which people also called out in the poll as something they think is the key hurdle for enterprises, right? Complex ESG regulations, regulatory compliance. I think that's important. I know Sushmita, you spoke about value protection and then evolving towards creation and acceleration, but I think the bulk of the market is still in that first phase, right? Given that it's still, we're still in the nascent stages. A lot of organizations still struggle with, getting their head around the regulations across geographies, right? And these regulations are different in different geographies. They're different for different industries and so on, right? So I think, if you think of use cases like traceability as well, how do you ensure and comply with regulations given that, today's supply chains are spread all over the world, right? If you're a large organization, your operations are anyways in multiple geographies. For smaller organizations, can you really invest the time and effort to understand these regulations, right? So I think that's where this is coming from. Data collection reporting, we touched upon this earlier, but this is really critical for effective ESG management. Right? If you don't have data, you can't track anything, you can't monitor and manage things, right? You can't report scope 3 emissions if you don't have any data coming to you. This data piece, I think, is a broader challenge in engineering as a whole, right? If you look at Gen AI as well, for instance, a lot of organizations are not able to implement it because their data pipelines, data lakes are not in place, right? So until and unless you have structured data formats, your models can read some of that, some of the data that you have, you can't really implement advanced technologies, right? I think it's a similar story playing out, in sustainability as well. The next 3 are, more consistent with what we see in engineering firms: change management, implementing a larger organizational change. It's always something that's challenging. A lot of it is driven from the top, but then you can't get it done unless, your operators on the shop floor are fully, bought into that vision, right? So I think that's something that enterprises continue to struggle with. It's also one area where some of their partners are able to add a lot of value, right? Lack of expertise to enable sustainable practices. Again, lots of organizations, given that this field is evolving, a lot of organizations, especially engineering organizations, still like to focus on what's core for their business, and that's essentially their product or the services they're selling. Right? So when it comes to sustainability, the lack of understanding of what this means and how they can integrate some of this into their existing products or even their operations and infrastructure, that comes across as a challenge. And then the biggest one, which is, resource and talent related constraints, right? Especially in today's scenario, considering the macro environment we're going through, ROI has become a lot more critical. So, enterprises are asking questions of the business benefits of sustainability initiatives, right? So a lot of these investments are being scrutinized now. And therefore, it becomes very important to prioritize which sustainability initiative or investment you need to go after, right? And that, of course, comes after you've thoroughly evaluated the various use cases out there, maybe pick off low-hanging fruit initially, and then gradually over time expand to some of the others, right? So clearly, lots of challenges for enterprises. And then I think the obvious question is, what are enterprises doing to address some of this? And there are multiple solutions out there. Organizations are investing in hiring people, upskilling, reskilling talent. That goes a long way. Lots of spending in tools and technologies which can track sustainability metrics. Rita initially spoke about the fact that we see a new stakeholder, a new role, the chief sustainability officer today. The fact that there is an investment going into creating that dedicated organization itself, that speaks, volumes to the investments enterprises are making, right? But I think one of the most important things I want to double click on is the role of third-party entities or service providers, right? And I think what's important to note is enterprises are partnering with service providers, and it's not just for 1 or 2 use cases. Providers have also evolved their offerings to a point where they can really work with enterprises irrespective of where they are on their sustainability journeys. Right? So we've highlighted a few examples or cases on the left of your screen. So if you look at the first one, which is a leading Japanese rail company, and I'm sure some of you can guess which company this is, but they essentially wanted support on understanding the regulatory landscape and then in monitoring, measuring scope 3 emissions, right? So this is the whole value protection aspect that Sushmita spoke about. And there are providers who offer these kind of services. The next one then is, a provider coming in, supporting their client in carbon footprint assessment, life cycle assessment. And it's not just the fact that they're delivering these services, but the fact that they've matured their offerings to the extent where they're able to, support the enterprise in reducing the time to market from 15 months to 9 months, right? That's a significant improvement in time to market development times. I think that's the critical aspect here. And then finally, when we look at sustainable products, plenty of examples when it comes to physical products, but even when we talk about software products and platforms, there are providers who are, bringing in inputs around product design, usability, and so on. And that really reduces the risk of engineering rework, and that has implications on time, effort, and so on and so forth, right? So lots of enterprises are already engaging with providers, and they've really called out, some of these parameters on the right as, what they perceive are key benefits, right? Very interestingly, domain expertise has been called out as a key strength of providers. And when we think of engineering, domain is not something that typically gets called out as a strength. Enterprises, OEMs generally believe that they have the domain and they want providers to support on, technical aspects, project management, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to sustainability, I think the fact that this is a nascent market, that means that they expect providers to bring in that knowledge on sustainability, which is why I think domain expertise scores so highly. Project management, this has typically always been a strength for service providers, so no real surprise to see a high score here. Technical expertise, again, lots of providers, working on sustainability tools, coming up with their own proprietary solutions as well, helping their customers on things like energy management and so on. And then finally, efficient talent management. So the ability to scale up, scale down, onboard people who have an understanding of the domain, who come with that understanding of regulations. I think these are some of the factors that, enterprises and customers have really called out as things that matter to them. With that, I think it's time for our final poll of the day. And Rita, I'm going to hand it over to you here again.
I'm on mute. I am on mute. Got it. So the last poll for today is, which of the following does your organization prioritize when selecting a service provider? And for those service providers in the audience, please, mark what you assume your buyers are prioritizing as well. And while folks are answering this question, Nishant, we also got a really interesting question in our Q&A from Sunil Nair, asking Nishant and Sushmita, when Sushmita was covering those 3 categories of spend, Sunil is asking, what is the spend profile for these 3 segments? I think what that means in terms of profile is, what's the opportunity in investing in those areas? So how much of that 72 billion that we talked about earlier in 2026 are we talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what's important to note, is that the market is still evolving, right? So we spoke about protection, creation, acceleration. A huge chunk of the market is still, rests between the value protection, value creation stage, right? I would say close to 60-70% of the market still lies there. So if you look at the challenges as well, what enterprises are struggling the most with is regulatory compliance, navigating through ESG, regulations, roadblocks, and so on, right? I think that's where the bulk of the market is today, but it's fast evolving as well, right? And I'm going to touch upon that, in about 5 minutes or so, but it's very interesting to note that there are organizations out there who've achieved maturity so quickly that they are really, at the far end of the value acceleration segment, right? So it's the smallest piece of the market today, but it's definitely not something that can be ignored. It's also the fastest growing segment. So I think that's where the market is, right? The bulk of the market is still in the initial stages, but then some of the value creation and acceleration bits are the ones that are growing the fastest.
Got it. Got it. Well, I think that question and, one of the highest percentages on our poll are in line with each other, that pricing and commercial flexibility are tippy top on their minds, but also making sure that there's the right domain expertise in sustainable engineering services. And that gets to the talent conversation that Sushmita shared with us. Also, quality of the talent has also scored pretty high. I think that's interesting. I think also what I would have thought would have been higher is some of the emerging tech. And perhaps that's, a sign that there's still this cautious optimism in the sustainability space and still waiting to see what's going to prove itself out. But I think that that's a good start. And I think it gets us into pretty nicely aligns with our advice on how to select a service provider. So one of the first things we really are emphasizing and looking at is that your partner in crime has consulting capabilities. So this is not a space where there's just a simple, here's the problem statement and here's the solution, but you really need someone who, a partner that's going to work with you on actually finding out what all those solutions are and help to create that business case that we talked about right at the beginning in our purpose framework. The second is having a broad service portfolio is very useful if your opportunities are also very broad. So we sort of highlight that as an important aspect for enterprises to look at, because that also then leads to more understanding of the sustainability specific industry, as well as the regulatory, the changing regulatory frameworks that we also talked about earlier. Third, we talk about having a provider's ability to tailor their offerings. I think that goes hand in hand with being able to do the consulting. And, for also, these need to be co-created, a true partnership so that the enterprise is solving what's truly the problem, or maybe even problems that they didn't necessarily see. So therefore, being able to co-develop those solutions. And finally, really thinking about a provider that can help you make those choices. I hate the word trade-off, or I hate the phrase trade-offs, but unfortunately, in the real settings, we know that there is oftentimes a trade-off between tech enablement and the actual carbon footprint. And I think when we talk about Gen AI, we talk about all of the opportunities that come with that, but then there's also the carbon footprint of the solution itself. So that's just one really important example. So let's move on to how it is that service providers are going to mitigate the challenges in our the conversation that we're having. And as we get into that, I want to also make a special offer to the service providers that are in our audience. And again, you'll see in chat a link to this, but again, we're making a special offer to service providers to get some insight into, are you able to meet all those expectations that we see enterprises have? As well as the 5 points that we've talked about that are important to reach. So again, you should see that link in chat shortly. And as that gets in, I'm going to hand over the baton to Sushmita.
Sushmita, you might be speaking on mute.
Sorry for that. So here I just want to cover the outsourcing market. The sustainable engineering outsourcing market is witnessing a steady growth. And to get deeper insights into our market trends, please look forward to our Peak Matrix report, which will be released in November. And coming back to this session again, when we look at the left-hand side, we see that majority of the outsourcing is driven by the North American clients and followed by the European clients. And in our sustainability enablement peak, which has a broader scope, North America was trailing a little bit behind Europe, but here in this sustainable engineering services peak, we are observing that North American clients are leading, and this could be because of increasing environmental regulations in the US as well. But most importantly, it is because of the increased R&D spend on sustainable technologies and engineering practices across all the major verticals. And if you look at the right-hand side, the automotive clients are leading the outsourcing, and the industry's shift to e-mobility and hybrid vehicles has been the major tailwinds here. And to support this transformation, there is an ecosystem of players who are offering, solutions such as battery management solutions, smart charging solutions, as we have discussed in the definition slide as well. And second is the energy and utility sector, given that this energy sector is one of the highest emission causing vertical. Energy enterprises are forced to adopt sustainability measures. And as a part of our peak process, we have spoken to a British electricity and gas utility company. I think Rita has also highlighted it in the initial part that they have closed the last coal mine for sourcing their energy, which is wow. And when they have, what they meant that, once they've closed the coal mine, they've started integrating or using solar and wind energy in their energy ecosystem. And not just renewable energies, there is also an increased usage of hydrogen and biofuels as source of energy, moving away from the fossil fuels. With all these transitions going on, there are great number of energy and utility clients which are looking for, outsourcing, which are looking out for help. And the rest of the industries are, there on the screen, and there are several trends which are pushing them to reach out to a service provider to help them in their sustainability journey. And see, this is just a broad overview of the outsourcing market. Nishant, could you just throw some light on the evolution of this outsourcing market?
Sure, Sushmita, and thanks for that overview. I think, very interesting to see that some of these trends are, I think, a bit different to how the overall engineering services market itself is. It's segmented across these verticals, right? So you've got energy and utilities, which forms a much bigger part of this market as compared to traditional engineering services. Electronics and high tech as well, I think, is a bit larger than how we look at engineering services outsourcing as well. So some of those aspects are interesting, but then again, given the relevance of physical products, it's understandable that you have medical devices and mining and aerospace and some of these verticals having a bigger share of this particular market, right? What I think is interesting to me, Sushmita, about this market is how quickly it's evolving, right? Despite the fact that it's a nascent market, I've said that multiple times already, but we've already seen so many significant shifts, right? In fact, 3 of them that we are pointing out and highlighting on this particular page. Business imperatives are shifting, right? Organizations are now looking at providers not just to realize business benefits and quick wins in terms of, hey, just come in and help me reduce my cost, help me reduce waste, help me optimize my energy consumption. That used to happen and it still continues to happen. But we see so many more engagements where enterprises expect their providers to come in, contribute more strategically and deeply, and help them being perceived as a more environmentally responsible organization. Right? I think that shift has been very interesting to see, right? So we've got use cases like cradle to grave sustainability, where enterprises are looking for solutions that address the entire life cycle of products, right from design and manufacturing till end of life, which I think is, I think the most important element of sustainability, right? So sourcing priorities and the vision of engaging with providers and the benefits that are being expected by customers are changing. I think, Sushmita, we were speaking a few days back, right? And you highlighted this US-based cold chain company that partnered with a leading service provider. I think this was an India-based service provider. And they were looking for end-to-end life cycle assessment services, which essentially help them trace and map the entire journey of their product, right from where the materials were getting sourced from to how it was getting disposed of, right? So I think that shift has been very interesting to see. The second big shift I think that we are observing is in the nature of use cases that are getting outsourced, right? So we had use cases like predictive maintenance, process optimization, smart engineering practices, and now we are looking at life cycle assessments, circular product design, sustainable packaging, and so on. I know, Sushmita, you plan to maybe touch upon this in a bit more detail, so I won't steal your thunder. But then finally, and this is perhaps the most interesting point to me, is how service providers have really evolved their go-to-market massively. Right? So back in 2020, it was all about repurposing existing solutions. So If you think about it, right, you have an energy management solution, which is nothing but fitting sensors on equipment on the shop floor, and that helps you track consumption, and then you figure out ways to reduce that, right? So it was a fairly simple IoT use case. Now it's being sold, marketed as something that comes under sustainability and sustainable engineering, right? So, and beyond this as well, there are a lot more investments in niche sustainability solutions, right? In fact, the peak matrix assessment that we're currently conducting, some of our initial analysis indicates that the number of standalone sustainability engagements has really increased over time. And these standalone engagements constitute around 40% of all the deals that are being signed in the market, right? So from sustainability just being a part of a broader deal or being embedded within a deal to us seeing standalone sustainability deals in the market, I think we've come a long way, right? Service providers also, of course, have developed solutions across each of the pain points that they're observing across their customers. And we spoke about ensuring compliance, for instance. That capability and that talent expertise doesn't get built overnight, right? So there is lots of investment that that providers are making, right? So maybe we'll do a quick double click on each of these. I'm also cognizant of time, so we'll be super quick through this final section. If we look at how some of these business imperatives have been changing, I already spoke about some of this, but there are essentially two key areas of focus, right? There's sustainability in engineering, all about lowering your material costs, reducing wastage, improving performance, and so on and so forth. Essentially looking at quicker wins, and providers also had offerings catering to these. So we had use cases around predictive maintenance and process optimization that were really the most common use cases that were being observed, right? Now we've started to look at engineering for sustainability, right? So I spoke about cradle to grave sustainability, enhancing brand image, and so on, right? So engineering service providers have also started to evolve their offerings, right? We're looking at things like life cycle assessment and circular product designs and sustainable packaging that that are really coming to the fore. And you'll start noticing that we're moving away from use cases that are simply creating an impact on the bottom line for enterprises, and we're moving towards use cases that actually have a revenue impact or a top line impact for clients, right? So that's I think the big shift that we're observing in the in this space. Sushmita, let me invite you in here to talk about specifically how some of these use cases are changing and maybe some of the investments providers are making as well.
Sure. Sure, Nishant. So that was a really helpful analysis of how the market is maturing. And as we see on the slide, we can see that clearly circular economy and responsible supply chain are the two key themes which are, witnessing the highest demand in the market currently. And circular economy here refers to the 3 R's. I'm not going into the details, but it is just reduce, reuse, recycle. And a lot of enterprises and major companies such as Apple has, are promoting circular economy with their initiatives such as its iPhone Take Back program and use of recycled materials in its products. And within the circular economy, adoption of the energy management systems is witnessing the highest adoption because enterprises are also looking to optimize their energy consumption, reduce emissions, and also to improve their efficiency. And they're also focusing on responsible supply chain to reduce their scope 3 emissions and to reduce their wastages. And with as you were talking, right, they have global supply chains and operations running across the world, and for them it really matters to look out for efficient routes for their transportation of material, reduce the number of trips to improve efficiency and optimize their overall operations. To do all of this, they are looking for logistics optimization, and that is why it has been one of the most adopted use cases. And when we are moving towards the left side, we are also witnessing highest demand for net zero services. And throughout the assessment, when we were talking to enterprises, we understood that life cycle assessment as a use case is very crucial for them to understand the energy profile, and followed by health and safety. If we could move to the next slide. So here, I just want to highlight how service providers are approaching the use cases that I've mentioned in the previous slide and how they're approaching sustainable engineering services. in terms of the investments that are being made. And here there are four things that I'd like to talk about. And first one is about IPs and solutions. So here, providers are establishing dedicated R&D centers. They're partnering with universities to understand the subject matters first. Unlike before, the solutions are not just one size fits all, but are tailored as per the pain points. And it's not just about making sure that the solutions fit as per the personas. They're also going deep into the verticals and providing verticalized IPs. And moving on to the partnerships, since the space of sustainability is still nascent, providers are also still finding their foot in this market. One interesting trend that we have observed is the joint go-to-market offerings. Providers are partnering with niche technology players who have a common sustainability vision and adding their own expertise and bringing out joint solutions to the market. And we are seeing a lot of trends in the talent part where they are hiring new people, they're upskilling the existing people, and they're also doing several acquisitions so that they could acquire new domain expertise and expand into new geographies. With this, I'm just going to conclude what the service providers are doing to reaffirm their solutions or to bring out their new offerings to the market, and hand it over to Rita.
Great. Thank you so much, Sushmita and Nishant. I think this was a really fantastic conversation, especially for the first time that we're talking about engineering and sustainability. We did have a few questions that were left open. We promised to get back to those folks over email. I hope everyone saw both of the CTA links, whether you're a service provider or you're a business looking for sustainability services. When you get this deck, you will see after these initial slides some extra resources, some blogs that we've been writing on the topic, some reports that are on this topic, related content. So we look forward to having lots and lots of conversations. I think this is a super exciting space, and we're just thrilled to be doing more on it.